What's up, everybody? My name is Brad, and welcome back to the second annual Brad's Book Awards, where I'm talking about all of my favorite reads from last year, from 2021. Now, these aren't necessarily books that came out last year. These are just books I happened to read within the last calendar year. And for today's category, I'm going to be breaking down my top 5 favorite short story collections. Now, looking back at my Goodreads when I was compiling all these lists, I actually did not read as many short story collections as I thought I did. But these 5 I'm going to be talking about today, these are definitely some really fantastic collections I think everyone should check out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into my top 5 favorite short story collections from 2021. So coming in at number 5, this is not a horror collection, but there are a few stories in here that could be considered horror adjacent. It has some dark themes you find a lot of times in horror. But coming in at number 5 is Coal Black by Chris McKinley. This is put out by Shotgun Honey Crime. This is your Southern grit lit type of stuff. It's unfiltered mountain crime, sort of in the same vein as your David Joys, your Ron Rashes, your Megan Lucases. It all takes place in eastern Kentucky in the Appalachian region. I really connected with that because I live in Kentucky, not quite in the Appalachian region, but I'm sort of right there on the edge of that. This is really all about people struggling to survive. It's about people who have been chewed up and spit out, who've been used and abused by time in industry, mainly the coal industry here. They've been left behind in the dust, the coal dust, you could say. And to sort of fill their lives up, to fill that void inside them, to survive and struggle and just get by day to day, a lot of them have turned to drug use. A lot of them have turned to crime, whether stealing or selling drugs, whatever it may be. That is sort of what we're dealing with here. It's really dark. There's poachers involved. There's petty crime. There's drug dealers, all that kind of stuff involved in these stories here. And the horror aspects I mentioned, there's a few stories here sort of about this haint in the woods. It's sort of this folklore thing. Is it a ghost? Is it a spirit? Is it a witch out in the woods? It's sort of the folklore where this one person has a story about it, but this other person has a different tale about it. And no one really knows what's true, if any of it's true. Maybe bits and pieces of it are true. Maybe you see a shadow running through the trees one day and you think it's the long black hair of this haint out in the woods. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. A really great collection here. If you're into crime, if you're into that Southern grit lit type of genre, I highly suggest you check it out. But coming in at number 5 is Coal Black by Chris McKinley from Shotgun Honey Crime. Coming up at the number 4 spot is The Razor Blades in My Head by Donnie Goodman. This is Donnie's debut collection, and I think he knocked it out of the park, especially for it being a debut. It's sort of a smorgasbord, a buffet of all different kinds of horror you have here. You have your body horror, you have your cosmic horror, you have your creature features. There's one about killer turkeys. There's one about killer snowman, as you can see from the cover. There's all kinds of stuff here. There's even a horror wrestling story, which I didn't know I needed a horror wrestling story in my life. But they're all really well done. They're pretty short stories. And you can definitely tell that Donnie has a love and a passion for horror, that he's a connoisseur of horror. They're all pulpy. They all feel like they're sort of a mix and mash up from 80s and 90s horror styles all mixed together. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a very fun collection. It's a short, quick read, but definitely had a blast, especially with all the different types of horror stories you have in here. No two felt alike while reading this collection. Yeah, it's a blast. I definitely suggest you check it out. And the cover is just absolutely killer. It's done by Justin T. Coons. But coming in at my number 4 spot is The Razor Blades in My Head by Donnie Goodman. Up next at the number 3 spot is The Strange Thing We Become and Other Dark Tales by Eric LaRocca. This was put out by Off Limits Press, although now I think it is out of print, but will soon be back in print through another publisher. I believe I have that information correct. But Eric, he has a very unique and distinct type of horror that he writes about. His prose is very beautiful, it's delicate, it's intricate, but he talks about these horribly vile, heinous, gruesome, just despicable types of things that I really dig his writing style. This collection, it has a bit of supernatural, a bit of body horror, some psychological horror going on. There's a story in here, I believe it's called Burn the Bodies. It was the second story in the collection. It's one of my favorite short stories I've read in quite a long time. I really connected with it on a personal level. We're following this lady and she has this compulsion, this desire, this need to burn things. And at one point in the story, she starts babysitting her 1 or 2-year-old niece or nephew. And I have a 1-year-old son, so I felt the danger for this kid, that this woman was going to burn this baby, that she was afraid herself that she was going to do this. And like I said, I felt that connection, that personal connection with the story. having this fear for this child that something horrible was going to happen to it. I won't say if it did or didn't. You'll have to read and find out for yourself. But the writing style, it definitely put me in that danger zone. Like, I felt for this kid. I needed to scoop it up and protect it from this lady so she didn't set it on fire. But overall, it's a fantastic collection. I highly suggest you check it out. Number 3 is The Strange Thing We Become and Other Dark Tales by Eric LaRocca. Up next at the number 2 spot is Perpetual Dread by Brian Boyer. And this is probably the most extreme thing I have ever read. I've read other extreme things, but the reason I like this one so much is because it didn't feel like it was being extreme for the sake of being extreme, if that makes any sort of sense. There are some really shocking things in here, but it didn't feel like Brian was doing them or was writing these things just for the sake of shocking and awing the audience. And I really appreciated that. It's weird to say that. I don't really know how else to say that, put it into words. But again, it was extreme, but it didn't feel like it was for the sake of being extreme. Everything that happens fits within the confines of the stories that Brian is telling here. His prose, it's cutthroat, it's to the bone, it's straight to the point. There's no filler, there's no frills to be found here. And no one is safe. The dad's not safe, the mom's not safe, the kids aren't safe, the pets aren't safe. Everyone dies here. There's no happy endings. This should be called Perpetual Dread. Everyone dies at the end by Brian Boyer. Again, there's a great range of different types of horror here. There's lots of body horror. There's a bit of religious horror, some drug use, some cosmic horror, some crime, all kinds of stuff, some creature feature kind of things in here. Brian really runs the gamut with all the different selections he puts in here. All the stories are quick, they're sharp, they're straight to the point. Again, like I said, there's no fills, there's no filler to be found here. If you are into extreme, I highly suggest you check it out. This is Perpetual Dread by Brian Boyer at my number 2 spot. And up at my number 1 spot, if you've been following my channel for any length of time, I don't think this will come as a shock or surprise to you. I've been singing this one's praises for a little while now. But my number 1 short story collection I read in 2021, go ahead and hit the drum roll, is Devil's Night by Curtis M. Lawson, put out by Weird House Press. This is my favorite short story collection of all time. It contains my favorite short story I've ever read of all time, and I absolutely loved it. Every single story in here hit the nail on the head for me. Everyone was a home run, knocking it out of the park. That doesn't happen with collections or anthologies very often. Usually you'll like quite a few of the stories, maybe a few duds here and there. There were no duds for me in this one. I thoroughly enjoyed every single one. All these stories, they take place on Devil's Night, the night before Halloween in Detroit, Michigan in 1987. I love the setting of it. I love the atmosphere that's involved. My favorite story is called D20 and mixes fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons with horror. You have these sort of back and forth where this fantasy aspects are bleeding into the real world, and I just absolutely loved everything about it. Being a huge Dungeons and Dragons fan, that one was just an absolutely killer story for me. Curtis Lawson's prose, it's sharp, it's clean, it's witty, and all these stories in here were just fantastic. You have some cosmic horror, just some weird stuff, some fantasy horror. Everything about it is just absolutely fantastic. I cannot sing its praises enough. My number 1 short story collection I read last year in 2021 is Devil's Night by Curtis M. Lawson from Weird House Press. And that's it. Congratulations to everyone who made my list. This has been my top 5 short story collections I read in 2021. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought about them down in the comments, whether you liked them or didn't like them. I obviously thoroughly enjoyed all of these. I highly recommend all the ones on this list and suggest you go check them out for yourselves. But that's all I have for you guys today, so thank you for spending your time with me. Again, my name is Brad, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.